let's let the panel introduce themselves. Just give a brief introduction. Why don't we start with Erin here?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Erin Kolmansberger. I'm a partner at Nelson Mullins in the Miami office. So I flew up this morning and was greeted with a little bit of chilly air, which was somewhat welcomed. Yeah, so I am a partner in the Miami office, like I said. I used to be a litigator years ago, and when I was doing that, I viewed my job and my role with my clients as problem solving, and I really enjoyed that. Around 2014, I started getting interested in crypto and blockchain. And at that point, I saw a lot happening, right? And as a litigator, you see a lot, right, in advance, a lot of things coming at you. And I didn't want to wait to help problem solve. So I am now in the regulatory space. So as some people might say, you know, I'm not necessarily the life of the party, a litigator and regulatory attorney, right? Some say I'm a bit of a buzzkill. But, you know, I really enjoy working with clients and helping get them to where they want to be. Also, I want to give a little plug out to the Women in FinTech affinity group that I co-founded with Katie Baker at Nelson Mullins. So we are we are the only Women in FinTech affinity group in the legal space and law firms across the country. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Gabby?
Sure. Hello, Boston. My name is Gabriella Kusz, and I'm the CEO of the Global DCA. My background's a little bit different. I focused heavily on international economic and financial sector development. So I previously worked for the World Bank and the US government. One of the cool things that I focused heavily on was the concept of self-regulation, or if that's too complicated, to think about it like a public-private partnership to regulate and to ensure market integrity and consumer protection. So glad to be here.
Great. Tom?
So Tom Hook, in addition to being a good friend of Ian's from college, I'm also the Chief Compliance Officer for the US at Bitstamp. I'm a recovering attorney. I started my career as a prosecutor in Manhattan and moved into the private sector, where I've been working in, my specialty is anti-money laundering compliance and financial crime compliance, but I've been overseeing compliance programs for years now in a variety of fintech organizations. This is my second crypto company. I tried to step away and it pulled me back in. So here I am.
Great. JD?
Yeah, so hello, everybody. I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV. I am the Chief Compliance Officer at Robinhood, their crypto arm. I had a long career in like large and small banks, worked in crypto with Tom years back, and prior to Robinhood, just recently I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. So I've, jumped from, large and small bank, traditional financial institutions. I worked at PayPal, and I've worked at large and small fintechs, and then working at the Fed, worked in a quasi-government agency. They're not really, I didn't work at the Board of Governors, so I was at one of their, I was at the Bank of Boston, and now I'm back in crypto.
Great, thanks everybody. So I'll throw this out to the general group. We're at an early stage, obviously, of adoption. Regulation, a massive issue. And Erin, I will take the counter to what you said, that you weren't the life of the party. I would argue in the TradeFi space, I would agree with you. But I think DeFi has got a way of supercharging the whole conversation, because we're still in that early phase. There's still enough people who are kind of curious about it. They're being pressured, for lack of a better word, by their overarching organizations to learn about it, to, is it a threat, is it an opportunity? I would just throw this out. Would you agree with that statement that DeFi has basically changed the conversation, in the sense that it's not the boring old financial services rigmarole from the 70s and 80s, that there is a special substance within DeFi that actually makes it quite engaging with individuals? Would you guys agree with that statement? I'll throw it out to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, coming into this, I've worked in traditional finance as well. It's much more exciting here.
Yeah.
You know, I think it is. You know, the topic of this is there really, you know, essentially how regulated are we? My day-to-day basis, heavily regulated, right? But it's exciting. There's challenges that you know, but there's a different flavor to them. There's problem solving, so you get to take a lot of that. All of the learnings that came from traditional finance and put them to a new space. Yeah. And that's, you know, the frustration on some days and the excitement on most days, I would say. But I think it's definitely, I get excited by it. I don't know if other people are excited when I talk to them about it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, it's funny because when I first stepped into the crypto space, you know, it was very clear that, you know, when the examiners would come in and they would look at, you know, your program early on, they were trying to check the boxes, right? They were looking at everything that they needed to see, and they were, you know, well, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And what I quickly realized was there were some things that we weren't doing that, because of the technology and because of the way the protocols were designed, we physically couldn't, or we technically could not check that box.
Yeah.
So then we had to take a step back, and my team and I would look and say, okay, well, how do we then let's look at the spirit of the regulation. Let's look at the intention of the regulation and see if we can structure our program to align to the spirit and the intention of the reg as opposed to the technical requirements of the reg, and build a defensible position around that. And that worked pretty well early on. And I think you know, that type of thinking and that type of mentality is going to have to, you know, really take hold in the DeFi space as we go.
Yeah, yeah. And just add to that, that I think one of the reasons why I think it's so appealing to so many more people than traditional financial regulation is that there is a mystery about it. I used to give talks on this, and I can't begin to describe how much credibility and traction I would get in these talks when I could walk people through the dark web. And I could go onto the dark web and I could purchase a bag of cocaine if I wanted to. I could purchase, you know, a different identity. I didn't, but I could. And I think it blew people's minds. And I think that there's that aura of mystery. It's like, whoa, it's crypto, man, it's bad actors. So based upon that, do you think that regulation is helping the perception of crypto being for criminals, right? Because that tends to be the general narrative with the mass media. It's like, oh my God, money launderers, where in actuality, it's just the opposite. If you're a money launderer, you want to stay well away from blockchain technology, right? Do you think that the way the regulation is being doled out, and Gabby, I'll throw this to you because you are literally on the front lines of this.
Yeah.
Do you think that regulation is helping kind of soften those hard edges around that narrative?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I'll kind of reframe a little bit, the question just around what it is that's actually happening. So when we talk about like DeFi or TradFi, I think the bigger narrative is the financial sector and economic transformations that are really taking place. So you're seeing a difference in the way that value is exchanged and people participate and interact with each other economically, okay, peer-to-peer versus through a centralized entity. And so because of that big transformation, it means that everything gets a little bit jumbled up. So that's where you see this like VUCA environment. This is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. But it's not unregulated. It just means that the regulations in some cases need to be somewhat harmonized or aligned in order to recognize the power of blockchain technology. And also from a point, you know, as we were talking, of a concept of really applying a more principles-based approach as opposed to a rules-based approach. So I think when we talk about what the role of regulation is in terms of maturing an industry, which is I think at the heart of what you're asking, I think that it will require a certain degree of reflection and almost reimagination of what it means to regulate in this environment in a way that is better tailored and suited to some of the unique aspects or contexts of this transformative technology and of this economic and financial sector transformation.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, and I was going to say, Erin, coming from the legal front lines, what's your take?
Yeah, and I just, when we're talking about perception, I think it's also important to take a look at the regulators and where they're coming from, right? So if we take a giant step back and we look at the purpose of the regulators, and their mantra is safety and soundness, right? They're there to protect and ensure that our financial markets operate accordingly and properly. So with the introduction of this technology and cryptocurrency and all these new ideas and these new products, I think that must have been, and it probably still is, very, very scary.
Yeah.
So whereas I think, regulators may get a bad reputation for resisting too much, I think that we're past the resistance stage. I think we're even past the analysis paralysis, where everybody is all sitting around saying, what do we do, what do we do? And now we're seeing regulators getting more innovative, taking comments, right, and taking them and turning them into action.
Yeah. Yeah, great points all around.
I was just going to say, just to add on that, I think where you're seeing that, proactively is on the state level. You're seeing a lot of state regulations come out specific to crypto. And I think, to my point earlier, and Gabby's point, there is a lot of regulation, defined regulation a lot from the state level. So a lot of the folks that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis are the state regulators who are becoming more sophisticated in knowledge about the types of controls that they would expect. And from, I think, the perception standpoint, bad news gets headlines, right? You hear about the problems and the faults, and that's what grabs the headlines. But it was the same in traditional finance, right? Madoff, Bank of America, there's a lot of, that always took the headlines too.
Yeah.
This is just the headlines with something that a lot of people also don't understand.
Yeah. And Tom, that's a great point. I know on our prep call, you brought up that state kind of patchwork. And I think Gus brought it up on one of the prior sessions, that the state regulations are a huge factor, and I think that gets overlooked because you're focused on the international play. It's a 24/7, 365 marketplace, borderless, universal. It's a completely different animal. But going to what you said, Erin, about the complexity of the technology. So I think all of us have seen the struggle that some regulators have in grasping the fundamentals of blockchain technology. But when you add on top of that, the merge, forks, I could go down the list of these events that are unique to decentralized finance. And I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on regulators to really up their game in the education area. Gabby, I was wondering if you think education in this space is going at the expected pace, or could it speed up so that regulators aren't blindsided by, well, what the hell is a merge? What does this mean? What's proof of work versus proof of stake? How do you see that playing out as one of the leading organizations in responsibility for education?
Yeah. So, again, I think, yes, you're seeing regulators all over the world, all at the same time, trying to grapple with the fact that this is truly a transformation, which means that at the core, if we pattern after other major economic or financial sector transformations that we've seen. So this is where, let's say, the fall of the Berlin Wall, people moving away from, communism and command control economies towards capital market systems or democratic systems, or trying to stand up and transform an economy from being very strictly based on one form of economic vertical towards a broader, more diversified economy. Education is always at a cornerstone, okay? And that is education that would be drawing in universities, third-party tuition providers, so that you have effective and adequate professionals who have the skills in order to meet the needs of market and government, okay? You also have a need to help regulators build capacity so that they understand some of this space. And we can go into this, I think, in later questions, but When you have these types of transformations, one of the most effective tools to be able to allow for that transformation to take place, but also to kind of complement some of what you would see from a former regulatory position, is to have an element of self-regulation or industry stewardship that actually helps to fill the gap and to support some of the regulatory coverage that you would want to see in order to ensure that you have the consumer protection and market integrity. And it's through that partnership that you're able to kind of jump this kind of like ravine or gap, you know, between what was, which was what we existed in prior to 2013, where you had all traditional finance, and sort of where we're going in terms of our like global digital future. And so I think that that's really the piece that, like when I look at this, it is education as a cornerstone, but the other piece that is in addition to that is capacity building, building out things like the checklist that you were talking about, where half of it may not work. No, now you have to reimagine how you will still provide that level of regulatory coverage with maybe a different checklist or maybe no checklist. Maybe you're looking at it from a very principles-based perspective until such time as that technology and that component of the industry matures.
Yeah, I'll throw this next question out to the gentleman representing the exchanges and whatnot, and just to stipulate, this has no reflection of their companies. I'm not saying their companies engage in this activity. This is just an observation. But I would point out that regulatory arbitrage is a huge, huge issue. I call it infrastructure light, so I'm consulting with the government of Vanuatu and bringing decentralized finance to them, completely isolated chain of islands in the South Pacific. They're being de-risked by their counterparties in New Zealand and Australia. So really DeFi is their only option to really push forward to possibly get up to global north economic standards. But this idea of infrastructure light, all you need is a smartphone and a Wi-Fi connection, right? Well, Starlink and Project Kuiper, Amazon's Project Kuiper and Elon Musk's Starlink, is beaming Wi-Fi into the most remote areas of the world. So the fact that you have this infrastructure light, you have smartphones, you have companies like Digicel distributing free and low-cost cell phones. This is a huge, I don't think we've ever seen this level of regulatory arbitrage. Do you see that as a competitive advantage for your competitors that are decentralized exchanges that are operating outside of kind of tier one regulatory regimes? Is that an unfair advantage that they have? I mean, I would argue that it is, but have you seen that impact your businesses locally?
I mean, I think in our careers, especially earlier on, stepping into this space, there was lots of conversations of why do we have to do X? So-and-so and so-and-so don't do X. Yeah. Right. And there was a business disadvantage, and there probably in very many places there still is a business disadvantage. I think what we're starting to see is the chickens are coming home to roost. Some of the names that you're seeing in the news, and it goes back to the bad news gets the press, but you're starting to see some of the fruits of the ill labors. I don't know what I was going for there, but
rotten fruit.
What?
Rotten
the
fruit.
Rotten fruit is starting to show up. Yes. So I think. Yes, there's still the ability to regulatory arbitrage throughout the globe because this is, there's no borders here, right? But I think you're seeing that less and less as regulators are becoming more savvy. Sure. And I think consumers are becoming more savvy too with the risks that come with some of these unregulated jurisdictions. Right. And as folks start to pay the price for that, they start to look for a more trusted, regulated, transparent organization.
Right.
And I think we're starting to see too, at least I'm seeing it more so now in the space than I did before, is more and more law enforcement agencies are starting to move beyond their borders. And you're starting to see more criminal cases coming out and more enforcement coming out on some of these exchanges or platforms or companies that had operated in this kind of regulatory arbitrage space. And it's becoming, I mean, I don't know anybody who works at one of those companies, but I would imagine that it would it starts to become a question on whether or not it's a viable business option as we move forward, because it's just, the long arm of the law, as they say, is starting to become very long.
Yeah.
And the second you step into, if you're on a plane and you step into a country that has these laws, they can arrest you at the gate.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, at what point is this become worth it?
Right. Right.
So that's
right.
the big question.
Right. Great points.
Can I, just to kind of add on that too, I think you're going to see for a while almost like a very broad scatter plot graph that kind of gradually narrows down until you have a higher degree of global harmonization. And jurisdictional arbitrage only works to the advantage of firms to a certain point, because once you start operating in 20, in 50, in 100 different countries, then the cost advantage of having to navigate that from a legal perspective, from an accounting perspective. So I always kind of feel like, well, these are growing pains that you will of course see. And over time, countries will work to try to harmonize it, and to create a higher degree of consistency and comparability with regards to their legal and regulatory frameworks. We can facilitate that as you are as an advisor to Vanuatu, as we are as an MOU partner or Memorandum of Understanding partner with our colleagues in Nigeria and India and 15 other countries.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you start to help people understand how to come to a happy medium.
Yeah.
Or a higher degree of consistency, and then that reduces the opportunities for jurisdictional arbitrage, and it also helps those companies that are truly resilient, globally competitive, and in it for the long run to be able to operate their business more seamlessly across borders. So, for those that are truly standing up, like our friends on stage here, high quality global firms, then that's the long game, and that's the broader game plan.
Yeah. Erin, I'm curious about your perspective from the legal angle. I guess, does your firm operate internationally as well as domestically?
Domestically.
Domestically, okay. But I would argue that you are impacted by this, right? Because certain counterparties could be offshore.
That's right.
Right.
We see a lot of clients coming in from Latin America,
Yeah.
from Europe, and looking to get into the U.S. market and looking to see how they collaborate. And it's all about collaboration at this point, right? So
Right.
we are seeing a lot more agencies collaborating with domestically and internationally, and the U.S. is really leveraging some of their relationships internationally to get all this collaboration happening, and for purposes of enforcement, but also just for information sharing.
Right, sure, absolutely, absolutely. And just one follow-on question related to that. So my background is compliance, and there was always somewhat of a wedge between the compliance operations and the legal operations within financial institutions. Is because everybody's kind of experiencing this growth at the same time, and there's still a significant amount of confusion. Are you seeing those bridges being mended between compliance and legal? Is there more kind of communication within, and I know you work at a law firm, but I'm thinking you may have some insight into that.
Yes, generally yes.
Okay.
I mean, I do see that there is a bit more of collaboration and more bridges between legal and compliance. I certainly am working with a lot of compliance teams.
Right, okay.
And they're definitely less, on both ends, everybody is less hesitant.
Sure. Great. And that brings me to one of my favorite topics, self-regulatory organizations.
That's your favorite topic?
It is. I'm a loser. I'm a loser. I could
Really?
never get a date in college because I want to talk about compliance and regulation. I'm kidding. But I know that the global DCA is really making a push in that area. How long until we see something like a FINRA or a SIFMA in the digital asset space, in your estimation?
Okay. So I'm also going to change this question a little bit, and I will say
Feel
that
free.
I actually think what's needed is a more like modern philosophy around self-regulation,
Right.
really, for this space. You need something that is global, flexible, responsive, and is able to provide in a timely manner perspective to people like these two gentlemen, so that they feel comfortable and confident about building and staying here in the United States.
Sure.
Right now we have lots of chief compliance officers and legal officers who are chewing Tums every night and, trying to figure out like how they're going to, work through a lot of a patchwork of legal and regulatory and sometimes overlapping or sometimes contradicting rules and regulations. And I think that when you look at this, typically the timeline, so you asked how long until there's a self-regulatory model. So typically it's a 3 to 5 year build in appropriate economic, political, social contexts with highly qualified technical expertise. I would say that we are on a timeline of about 2 to 3 years outside of that, and we are already about 1 year in. And the rationale behind that is that this industry is just moving so fast, and there is such a demand for that level of clarity today. And it's more than just about industry stewardship and leadership. It's also about actually protecting consumers and actually enhancing market integrity. Because right now, if you have regulators that are fighting or you have, confusion in the market, let's think about what your ultimate impact of every legal and regulatory framework should be, which is the people who will potentially be
Right.
harmed if you fail.
Right.
And so in that respect, I think there's no time like the present to be building, and that includes self-regulatory organizations. And I think building that so that it is done intelligently and that it is done from a point of precision-based regulation that leverages some of the natural aspects of blockchain technology that gear towards transparency and accountability, and allows people to, through a principles-based regime, be able to understand what they can and cannot do, what the nature of a digital asset is and isn't, and provides, greater information to consumers so that they feel comfortable engaging in this space.
Right.
I think that ultimately is, the timeline that we're on, 2 to 3 years, and what ideally it would look like in the end.
Right, and that really would change the whole conversation. I mean, registration, Series 7, Series 24, I'm not saying that you would have those kind of certifications, but it really would change the conversation, and I think go far to further legitimize this space.
Well, and I think too, like, it's not just about, I always tell people, I'm like, the SRO itself, that's not the thing that you're doing. It is all of this part. Like, have you ever heard someone say, it's not the destination, it's the journey? It's kind of the same thing with self-regulation. You're bringing people on a journey of understanding what the rules are, the standards and guidance, providing individuals education and training so that they can stand up a department for compliance or legal or so forth, and then helping those firms to build systems, policies, processes, procedures that are compliant with those rules and requirements, so that ultimately those 3 lines of defense very naturally lend themselves towards consumer protection. And so then when you look at what it would be like to go in and to do, maybe I'm just going to say quote unquote inspections, it is not necessarily at the same level. It's not a gotcha moment. It's your self-regulatory entity is your partner in building right the first time. So preventative versus reactionary, and anticipatory versus like remediating.
Which we don't seem to be getting right now. I mean, I could go on for a long time about this, but Anchorage and them being hammered about their BSA program after they were fully vetted by the OCC, or, Coinbase voluntarily releasing the staff accounting bulletin and seeing, a rush on their marketplace to where they had to shut down for 2 hours because people were freaked out that they were going to lose all their assets if there was a bankruptcy. Come to find out, no, they weren't obligated by law to file the SAB or to answer to the SAB 121. They did it voluntarily, but they went the extra mile. And that's this kind of 2-tier treatment of TradFi institutions and DeFi, but I won't. Oh, please.
I was going to say, what this has me kind of thinking about, and I 100% agree. I think what's interesting is if you think about the lifetime of cryptocurrency, like Bitstamp's been around for 11 years.
Yeah.
And that's like old, right? That's not, traditional finance different animal, right? So
Yeah.
you have people who have grown up, are comfortable with,
Right.
use all of the products, have used them for most of their life in traditional finance. It is inherent in them or more intuitive to build controls and understand how to test and apply different standards to those.
Yeah.
We're working in a field, in an industry that changes day to day.
Yeah.
And so it's like hitting a moving target, but you're also introducing people into that space who maybe haven't used it on a day-to-day basis, right? And so there's a learning curve of product, learning curve that changes on a day-to-day basis. And so that's where the speed of an SRO and that journey of bringing everyone to that similar level of understanding to apply similar standards, create clarity. Clarity creates confidence. And all ships rise on that tide, right?
Absolutely.
Everybody gets confidence, more consumers come, businesses do well.
Well, and I think there's also, having that freedom, right, to say to a governing body, hey, this area is not, we know it's not up to par. We want to bring it up to par. We'd love to have a conversation with you about getting it up to par. That's difficult when you are having that conversation and you're crossing your fingers that that same governing body is not going to now play an I gotcha moment and now do a 2-year look back.
Right.
And you're like, well, I knew it was wrong. I'm trying to fix it. I need your help to fix it.
Come to Jesus,
Like,
man.
yeah, so it's having that ability to identify areas that you want to improve, having that collaborative conversation, and being able to come to a mutual agreement on the path forward. And I think having that type of environment would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to that end, I'm seeing more regulators looking forward and welcoming those conversations. So it's not an environment anymore where we're shaking and we're scared and maybe rocking in fetal position when the regulators get a call from us, right? So they're welcoming the dialogue, they're welcoming the conversation because everybody is having the same collective goal.
But it's the trust, right?
Right.
Because now the institution or the company now, because I've heard from many regulators that say, yes, come and talk to us.
Yeah.
And now I'm on the other end going, are you sure
Third rail.
I can do that?
Yeah.
Because, it's so now there's a lot of work on the regulatory bodies too to now build that trust back up. And that's a tough job.
Yeah.
That's going to be a difficult path.
No doubt.
I think I was just going to add just along those lines, I'm certainly seeing with state regulators, again, who are going through examinations, we'll go through multi-state exams.
Yes.
And some of these regulators won't regulate crypto, but we'll have crypto-specific meetings, and they'll ask to join because they know it's important for them to understand.
Yeah.
Right.
They're taking that time out of their day to sit and learn from us, and that builds that trust.
Yeah.
That down the road, when their state does regulate it and we are licensed by that state, we're going to have a really thoughtful, educated conversation about it.
Absolutely.
It's great.
Absolutely. And with that, I'd like to thank the panel. I was so honored to be able to moderate this. You guys are awesome. Thank you for the honor. And that's it. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for having us.
Exactly.